Hello, it's August 4th, 2018. I'm Tony Smario, coming to you from my father's YouTube channel, BroSal.org. And we're going to do another edition here, Connecting the Dots, because I don't have the time. I'd like to get back to the Bible study just yet and some of the other things that we were following up. And Dad's learned a lot about how to get some, at least increase the opportunity for viewership through boosting the site on Facebook and things like that. And so he's going to try and do a little boosting of our site, and hopefully that will result in an increase of people getting a chance to see what we're saying. So I thought, let's keep it current right now, and let's talk about some stuff that, well, I've been trying to think of some things that separate us and bring together our story. That's why this whole Connecting the Dots 2018, let's sort of summarize everything we've learned. It's what I've been doing for myself, analyzing all the things that we've gone over for the last 2 or 3 years and seeing how far we've come from the time when I used to think there was a rapture, to realizing that almost everything Christianity has to say is the same sort of propaganda that everything else in our Western culture, in the United States and their allies, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere. The people that pull the strings set Russia up and China up and Iran up to be who they are. And so they want them doing just what they're doing. Anthony Sutton pointed out back in the 70s that communists are something that the people in charge that are creating all the technology, they want to keep communism because you don't expect communists to produce new technology. So as long as you're providing them the technology, you're in control. And so that shines a whole new light on, what was going on in the so-called Cold War. And this perspective of history is so essential if you're going to have a realistic vision of today's world, rather than being driven and tossed about like waves on the sea as the wind of propaganda changes. They tell you today that sugar's good for you and tomorrow that it's bad for you. Today the coffee's good for you and tomorrow the coffee's bad for you. All this, and you just don't know who to believe anymore. And if you've been listening to our investigation and research for the last couple of years, you know that it's so, there's no foundation, there's no substance to believe what they're talking about. They don't take anything into consideration that the alternative media has pointed out since we've had an alternative media in the last decade or two, that there's been this internet and all this information coming out. Some of the information, as I pointed out, is the truth because they want the truth out, because in their mind, they're the good guys. They're not the antichrist, devil from the sky, evil. They're actually the ones that have the foresight, I guess, initiated qualities. They have the characteristics of the people who've been initiated into the knowledge. They know why things are the way they are and what has to be done for mankind to progress. And they're willing to do what has to be done. And as I've been talking about, that's tantamount to cutting the cancer out of the patient, killing the patient to save them. And it's funny how many of our movies, are along those lines. The cancerous humanity that has to be, and of course, they paint in their dystopic vision so that we say, oh, ooh, we're not, thank God it's not like that. But of course, ever since 1984 came out, which I've heard was originally supposed to be titled 1948, the year that it was written, but it was too obvious. And so they sold it overseas to the American market under the title 1984 as a futuristic sci-fi dystopic story instead of what was being written as a modern time satire of what was really going on. Excuse me. And so I have to keep repeating that because I feel like no matter who you are, if you listen here, you're out in the world, and even I sometimes can hardly believe that everything I've found out for myself could actually be true, since I keep feeling like I'm one of the only people that seems to see it this way. But there's others, and of course my vision, my story is corroborated by so many others that go back in this line of little known for the most part people like Anthony Sutton and this type of uh, investigative journalist of the past that we still get just a taste of anymore because the truth is out there. So the introduction is just to keep offering this separation of our vision from everyone else's. We got something different to say because we see the world different, or the reasons that the world is the way it is for different reasons than others. We see a spiritual side, but we don't see angels and devils flying around the sky. We see that as propaganda. Um, we see that the prophecy that's so elusive and compelling, all the way back from, say, uh, Newton in the 16th or 17th century, I guess. You've got just this understanding that there's something there that's, a marvel. And it seems to have been hidden in the propaganda of the religious, just like true government's been hidden in the propaganda of the red team, blue team, politic that's now supposed to be so normal everywhere. But I have an idea I want to share with everybody with this one about money, because money is so important to all of us, wherever you are, unless you're on some tiny island that's never had cell phone coverage, and then money's not so important. Excuse me, fishing is important, and maybe climbing coconut trees or whatever part of the world that island happens to be in. But for everybody else, certainly that would be listening to the YouTube broadcast, money is, it's the lifeblood that keeps life flowing. Without it, life gets reduced. As I say, anywhere where I'm just going to break it down to cell phone coverage. If there's cell phone coverage, then life is based on how much money you can afford to bite off or buy, uh, you know, day by day, month by month, year by year. Can you afford to buy, all the luxuries and the cars and the houses and or can you only afford the most simple sustenance? And where in between do we all fall? And it's all measured on money. And that's all there is to it. How else do we measure everything? Whether we like it or not, whether it's really conscious or unconscious, subconscious. I say unconscious, just a habit like driving. You realize you've been driving for an hour and you don't even remember because you've been thinking about something else while you're driving, because it becomes an unconscious habit. And so I say we're very unconscious about the habit of the value that and the place that money has in our life, what it really means to us. And so I've just made a few notes that I just want to bring out an idea about that connects to this whole world that I'm always presenting, the control, the point of it all, to cull the earth of the unfit in the Darwinian sense. The people doing the culling don't really believe in a Darwinian evolution. Or I should say they don't believe in strictly a Darwinian evolution. They believe that there's a Kabbalah sort of spiritualism. Man is moving through some dimensional, experiential learning process. If that's this pretty crude way of putting their higher thinking, but the ones that see it as more than animalistic, if you listen to Manly P. Hall, or you read Morals and Dogma, things like that, you see that their vision is of one where man has a responsibility to take on this Christ-like quality, which they relate to the story of the person we call Jesus, though that wasn't his name. Funny, his name was so simple. I mean, in Hebrew, just like his father, or his father was Joseph, but he was Joshua, Yeshua. How how it is that he's not known as Joshua is kind of remarkable. But anyway, Jesus, the centerpiece of this religion that's clearly an apostasy, as we teach in the Bible study, the ones that profess it are an apostasy. The ones almost anyone you know that professes it and is an apostasy. It's a forsaking of the truth that the Messiah taught. The love your neighbor, forgive everyone, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, turn the other cheek. You live by dying. That's not what Christianity is all about. I mean, none of it. And we'll talk more in depth, I think, about the propaganda that you see, like from one of the rabid comments. We don't get many, but we did get one rabid comment recently. It's kind of fun on an older thing we did with Enoch. A real fundamentalist that telling me what a heretic I am, and also the Catholics. So they're just a false religion. And this fundamentalist Christian, I suppose, doesn't understand their history, that all of their Protestantism in our modern day is, why do you think everybody's wearing all these Catholic associated fraternity um, pins and robes and all the all the people that are in charge of the American Protestantism are all connected through the fraternities to the Catholic organizations. And so, they both claim this Jesus that's a twisted, completely out of shape version of the truth. This Jesus that is sending everybody to hell if you don't believe in him. And then to make sure that those people aren't all together, you divide them into, Catholic and Protestant. And then to make sure those people don't agree, you divide the Catholics into sort of the fundamentalist Catholics, like the book we started reading about how they did that, according to this author, and the New Age Catholics that can believe stuff that the old time Catholics couldn't accept. And they had a complete division right down the middle of Catholicism that, of course, they're always showing us in the news today. They exacerbate today. And then over there in Protestantism, old Christianity, you've got nothing but division, 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 so that anybody that does actually think they believe in Jesus is ready to kill someone else that also thinks they believe in Jesus over some technicality about how they believe in Jesus, or when Jesus is coming, or what they're supposed to do or not do. And I'm spending a minute on that, even though this isn't a Bible study, just because anyone who doesn't realize that that's all, none of that's scriptural. That's all this bullshit religion that's got absolutely nothing to do with what's written in the scriptures. It's a twisted version, just like the American government is a twisted version of what's written in the Constitution. Theoretically, the people should govern themselves, but go back and read how the people are supposed to govern themselves through state government, not federal government, and through arms that the people have to make sure that when the crooks get in, the people go root them out and throw them out. And if they don't keep that vigilance, the people who set it up knew, well, you're not going to be able to keep your honest government. And so I'm not advocating armed revolution. We lost the chance that the original founders, when everybody had guns to protect themselves, mostly from the animals around them. Those guns were then in our original declaration. Hey, you might have to turn those on the power structure now and then to keep them in check. And if you don't, for sure, they will take the power from you. And I mean, that's right. It's right there in the original message from them. So it's just they don't really tell you that, and they don't put it in a context of completely losing that. Some One or the other might put it in a context of blaming the other side, the red team blaming the blue team, but neither of them will put it in the context of demonstrating how their red team, blue team paradigm is a complete undermining of the people being able to have a decision about their government. You think how the way the corporations are so much more important than the people. That a person nowadays, a human like you and me, if I have a great idea to feed some people or start some company or solve some problem or do something, what's the chances there's money there, that there's funding, that there's resources for a human being like you or me to do something? In fact, we can't even get into the business selling tacos or fruit out of the barn door of our fruit orchard, because you know why? The permits and et cetera, in the United States of America, Western Europe, it's in all these wonderful rich places. They're so rich that only the corporations can afford those permits and those insurance and those licenses. They're supposed to keep us safe. But of course, that's really all a lie. And I'm sure the people listening to me know that. So we'll move right on. What I'm getting at in this discussion about money is the way the value system's been turned on its ear in our culture, to where the individual is really not valued like the corporate interest. Well, because they bring jobs. Oh, they bring jobs. Oh my God. What can you or I do to provide jobs? Well, I remember when I was young, the accusation against big corporations was that they took jobs. They didn't bring jobs, they took jobs. So either those people were really stupid or they had a different perspective. And I think the different perspective is this. When I look at where I live in Mexico now, for instance, I live in a small town, but all the towns are pretty much the same. Even you go to a big place like Puerto Vallarta that now has Walmart and Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's, but not every restaurant is a corporate restaurant. Not every shopping venue is a corporate venue. Those large corporations are still slowly robbing the citizens of their normal venues which have always been the same. The mom and pop stores that are doing the job individually that a corporation is doing by providing 100 low-paying entry level, let's say, for the most part. In our terms, where I live in California, you're talking $12 an hour to $14 an hour jobs, normally around cities where it costs $1,000 to $2,000 a month to rent an apartment. So when you calculate it out, the problem is the 12 to $14 job, doesn't offer you much of a life, let alone build a home, buy a car, start a family, start a business. Good luck. Whereas a generation ago, when the corporations were taken over and the accusation was, hey, you're stealing jobs, is because, say, Home Depot, where I've had to resort to shopping lately for some stuff, I notice, when I'm in Mexico, I go to the ferreteria, they call them, the hardware store, and they sell tools and the fittings for tools, drill bits and some sandpaper and saws and saw blades and those things. But if you want paint, you go to a paint store. And if you want building materials like concrete blocks or steel or wood, you go to, you go to a separate building supplier. Because, of course, that wood supplier is owned by somebody that's an individual. It's not Home Depot. It's somebody like you or me that just happens to have the land and happens to have the tools and has been milling wood for whatever reason. And they're in the wood milling business, so you buy wood from them. And then the other guy here or gal or the family, they have property where they've been in the paint business for whatever reason. They buy and sell paint. And the other people, they're just conveniently located. They decide to get in the hardware business, and they sell hardware and tools, and so it's everywhere you go, whether it's to buy tires or buy tools or buy wood or buy fasteners or buy paint. You're dealing with a business that's usually owned by the proprietor, run by the proprietor and normally their family and friends, like it used to be in our country 1 generation ago for the most part. 2 generations ago, for sure, nothing else. So the corporations come in, and now you go to Home Depot for all these things, and some unknown board of directors that gets all the money at some point. You don't know any of them. They don't know you. They have no, they don't know anything except some sort of schedule of running these, some bean counters, which is not a nice way of saying accountants, pencil pushing accountants figure out where property's cheap, how to maximize labor, how to squeeze. So this is what corporations do, and they're more valuable than the people, right? In our system, they get all the breaks, they get all the tax breaks, they get all the breaks, they get to get into business, they get to borrow tons of money from the banks, even if they go broke. They get to borrow it, they get to do it. You and I, we can't compete anymore in our culture. And so I want to point out how our value system that values the corporation, that's lost the value of individual proprietorship, just like the individual vote. The fact that it's our country, like it's our family, like it's our house. You don't just do something to my house without me having a say. It's my house. So when you think of that as your city, your state, your country, your world, we're all in it together. We're all responsible. So governance becomes a pretty big thing, and the value of it. So I want to take this somewhere else right now with money rather than governance, and where we're missing the boat on this red team, blue team deception while we argue with each other about why the blue team should become the red team or the red team the blue team. all of that is predicated on a system of money being our God, essentially, being our value system, which in the sense of a God is what is substituted. Because um, in our system, in our culture, what I notice now as I look over my lifetime, the acceptance of the idea of a God outside of us, which seemed to be generally accepted as a possibility, if not some sort of, how many people just were ready to die or kill for this unseen God. But it certainly seemed that you couldn't write it off completely. In fact, you could make enemies, you could propagandize into the world enemies because they were atheists. They didn't believe in God, which made them awful people. Even though, of course, all the people that started our country were deists that didn't believe in God. They believed in a type of God that was themselves for the most part, but not the God of the theists, that's for sure. So anyway, they made atheism something a couple generations ago that you could rally a country behind. And now what's interesting is they're doing just the opposite. They're making this new age, let's say, atheism, which is the same thing as new age spiritualism. They're both the same thing. But they're making that the rallying cry now of this whole modern generation. So in a couple generations, and I say it's all been done by the value system of money becoming through much concentrated effort the only God outside of ourselves, or the only value system outside of our own, whatever you want to call it, our inner self, our intuition, our consciousness, all the new age higher self expressions. These are the only two gods that are left. If you're a, a dyed-in-the-wool materialist atheist, then there's not. Money is the power in the world. Period. There's no doubt. And so this is what I'm trying to get at, that that's not an accident. This whole money's the root of all evil. Uh, I think this is a very important departure point in the discussion of money, because it brings up evil. What is evil? Before we get at this expression, the root of all evil, what is evil? Money, nothing saying money is evil. Money's the root of all evil. Huh, how's that? Get your mind around that for a second in this discussion. Money is the root of all evil. Well, what's evil if money's the root, right? Again, think of how the scriptures treat money versus all our other vices. People were getting drunk and raping and killing, and those things are almost passed over as secondary, certainly, to acts of greed, at least regarding the Messiah's the rendition we have of the Messiah's teaching. It's those greedy priests, it's the money changers in the temple that have turned God's house into a den of thieves, right? Money, 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 thieving, taking. So what's really evil when you look at what the Messiah preached about love even your enemies and live by dying and bless those who curse you and turn the other cheek? As I've been noticing for some time now for myself, and trying to put into words and teaching in the Bible study, that the whole thing seems to boil down to selflessness versus selfishness. That's that inner struggle, the demons, the angels, however whatever that really means, and I'm a spiritualist in the sense that I can't explain prophecy. I can't explain my own metaphysical view of reality and life and death and consciousness except through a dimensional existence where some mind is in charge, is the mind that my consciousness must descend from. It can't descend from air or space dust, I don't think. I don't believe that. Therefore, given the only other option, it either descends from space dust or it doesn't. An alien brought it. Oh, maybe. Or maybe some mind. I'm the result of a mind. Well, that makes the most sense to me. So in my own metaphysical view, I say, I have a dimensional spiritual view, but it's not of a God floating around another planet looking down on whether I, drink too much. I mean, are you kidding me? That's not what's in there. So what's in there seems to center around what this whole idea of money being the root of all evil. And it's more than that. I want to get to a deeper vision of it here in a second, but we have to keep going around this circle for a minute. What is evil? Selfishness rather than selflessness. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your brother and do unto others as you would do unto yourself. So it's all about this recognizing the love and self-centeredness that we naturally have, which is very easy, and recognizing that the spiritual life is in confronting that, which brings that overcoming concept. He who overcomes what? I'm always saying, believe in Jesus. That can't be it. That can't be it. So many people around the world don't even have that option. What is there to overcome for everyone all the time except that selfishness, that love for self being so powerful that we're willing to hurt other people, take from other people to get more for ourselves. And so, I say that that's the nature of evil. It's in a selfishness, and that's can bring in the pride, this fall that comes through pride. Why shouldn't I have more? I'm smarter, I'm better, I'm taller, I'm whiter, I'm blacker, I'm, whatever. Why shouldn't I have more? Because I can. And what's so interesting is I find it fits my own metaphysical understanding that, it's such a universal. There's no consciousness except something perhaps abnormal that doesn't face this sort of self-centered characteristic about consciousness. And so it adds to me some credibility to this messianic vision. You live by dying. You know. So money being the root of all evil, all this self-centered selfishness, right? Going all the way back now for 2,000 years, being able to be pointed at as, the root of all evil. So, which brings up for me something that I've been also talking about for a long time. You can't serve both God and mammon. God, the Apostle John says, is love, and mammon is clearly in our modern day money. It's the force of power and authority. You can't serve both love and money. It is a real close conversion in my view, of you can't serve both God and mammon, especially considering that that comes at the end of the Messiah talking about the money and how selfish all these people were, and the rich easier for a rich man to get through the eye of a needle, or a rope to pass through the eye of a needle, than a rich man to get into heaven. These are all the kind of things that don't, they get talked about in stupidity Christianity, but very rarely does anyone focus on them as like a central issue of reality. And for me, relating it to this whole connecting the dots to the great deception that is this world we live in, a completely controlled, like a Truman Show environment, where they give us the news and they give us religion and they give us our heroes and our TV crap to distract us or inform us, and all along what's behind it all is a value system that's not predicated on a person's value in the way the Messiah would have seen it. Do you love your neighbor as yourself? Do you give? Are you a giver? Are you someone that not give to get, but just give because it's the way. It's the way of God. It's the only thing that lasts. It's what lasts forever. It is heaven. Heaven is within you. So what's within you? The ability to give. So I want to set all that against this concept of money that we live under, which is like, it's so absurd that when I first considered it, I thought, man, that's just too powerful. I mean, I really just wanted to walk away and think, well, the only way to be near God would be to just abandon completely money and walk away. But walk away into what? I mean, where do you go? How do you even get there? How do you walk? Where do you get your shoes? When do you learn to start making your own clothing? Making what? Where do you even start? And so this is how I see we've been entrapped into the world where money is our God. We've been given that God at the exclusion of other gods, let's say, other value systems, other things to worship besides either ourself, because we're just an animal, or our buying power, because that's all there is in the temporary world. So what I find the most interesting is that Western culture, which is the one that pretends to be doing the altruistic, we're the altruistic ones, preserving right. And boy, when you watch the movies, if you've listened to me for a while and you watch any movies, you see how clear it is, how constant, how relentless it is to show the USA as the defender of good, even when they show all the bad things that are done in the supposedly modern enlightened movies. It's always the good American spy, the good American assassin, willing to kill the right people, get to the bottom of it, return the power to the people, so that we feel so good going back to work where we're powerless and enslaved in our system to money, with nowhere to turn. I mean, we bow to the money, and we have to, and we all do it, and we have to, because it's money and yourself. These are the gods in our culture. And if you look at history, it's one where this culture has destroyed all competition. And I've pointed this out before. I believe it's necessary. You you cannot let human consciousness see the alternative, because you cannot go back. You can't forget it. It's like when you take people from the third world. And I was married once when I was young to someone from Jamaica, and she, all she ever dreamed of was going to America and going to malls, big cinema complexes and having access to supermarkets full of all that packaging because they had such a limited yet much more organic or agricultural upbringing. And so you just couldn't get that out of her. She'd seen it as a child. She'd seen it on her television screen, and you can't go back to pretending when you walk in your store you don't wish it was one of those stores in America. Excuse me. And so while they've painted that picture and gotten us all to worship money by taking away another value system, we're not praised and elevated and nurtured along a value system of doing unto others and turning the other cheek, and it's just the opposite. And meanwhile, before we even got to, say, compulsory education, where we started instilling in this modern Western culture these valueless values of ours that turn us into helpless slaves to our brainwashing. Before that, you think about all the indigenous nations all over the world. You think even about the true religious that were still existed over there in the Middle East and Russia, Greece, and all the places that the followers of the Messiah ran, and all this kind of thing. The Chinese, with all their wisdom of the ancestors, and were their ideas of a unity of an unseen world with a seen world, all this kind of thing. If you would have offered people a choice and they'd seen all that, it'd been impossible to force us into this worship of money and nothing else. Apes, ourselves as apes, and money as the greatest tool. If you saw the way indigenous feel, for instance, Native Americans or Aborigines or any of them, that's not the value system at all. That's not the way their societies worked at all. And of course, money is just a concoction of our own. It used to be based on intrinsic things of intrinsic value, metals. It's funny how people think gold and silver are so valuable now. That's a silly game, as I pointed out, that's being played with people to get you to convert your last assets into gold or silver, which can do you no good when the economy crashes because you can't eat them. And once they give you a conversion rate, there's nothing you can do but convert your gold and silver at the rate they give you, or eat it, hang on to it, sit on it until someone comes and kills you for it. I mean, anyway, it doesn't do you any good when the time comes. And just like the scriptures said, funny enough, they didn't say save up that gold and silver, but your gold and silver won't save you in the end. And I see why, because the people have turned money into God, and then I'm going to let you have your own God. Not that way. They control God. They control where it's at, what you can buy. That is the tool. That's what everyone worships. It's what you worship. It's the only thing that's got value. It's the value. And so our culture destroyed all the indigenous cultures so that you couldn't see an alternative to this valueless system, and then turned what used to be intrinsic barter, rice or beans or buttons, right? Useful things that had longevity. And they turned that into this worthless notes, promissory notes, that they could then start loaning at interest. And then, of course, fractional reserve banking Who knows what genius really came up with that and how far into the plan, but when we see that enter the stage of history, our modern world starts there with the control that comes from fractional reserve banking. And that's not a hard thing to find out if you want to do the research behind that. My point is to show, well, boy, there you go. Money, 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 money makes the world go round, doesn't it? Money, root of all evil. What's evil? The value of seeing yourself above or beyond someone else. What's the tool that ensures that? Money gives you the measure to measure yourself against someone else that doesn't have to do with you loving anyone. So I find that I guess the last point that I'll make today that seems so obvious to me is the way money relates to a human life in our culture over any extended period of time, say 100 years, say even 50 years. If you go back 50 years into any indigenous culture, you find them in the same state that they are today and that they were 50 years before that, let's say, as far as resources, utilities. When you look at our modern culture over the last 100 years and even 50 years, you find that when you relate money to the value of a human life, you see that a human life was worth a lot more money 100 years ago. And then 50 years ago, it was worth less, but it was still worth a lot more money than it is today. A human life today isn't even worth enough to rent a decent place to live, raise a family, eat good food. Nope, you got to eat fast food junk. You got to live with other people or couple. You have to be a multi-working family just to afford to survive and survive on the lowest available everything: home, car, food, entertainment, recreation. Everything has to be the lowest that's available to the working class. So, and since most of the world is work, not everybody can be the aristocracy, right? Most of the world has to be the working class. Even in an ideal indigenous society, everybody's working. There's might be a few representatives like kings or priests that sit around, but they don't really sit around. They mean something to the society which is all working beneath them to support this mechanism. And in our weird society, we somehow feel really comfortable that a very, very, very minute fraction sit atop with all of the tool, the money, all that they could ever, they can't choke on it. They can't, they couldn't bury themselves deep enough in it. It's just endless, endless, endless money, endless opportunity, endless luxuries, endless um, fulfillment of any particular desire, and their ability is strictly limited to their physical ability to fulfill it. And that's just reserved for, like I say, this minute fraction. And then you get the workers for them, the Rockefellers and the Bushes, the Clintons, the Trumps in our culture, that get to live a life that they can see is almost immeasurably above the working class in every way. And then you get that 99% that just keep having less money. We still have 24 hours in a day. We still seem to live about the same amount of time. We still seem to eat and sleep about the same. I mean, all things seem to be fairly consistent in the last 50 years, except that a human life, according to money, for 99% of us, is now not worth nearly as much as it was, 50 years ago. And nobody really questions that aspect. Why isn't my day still worth the same as it was for my grandfather? What's different about my day? Oh, all this technology that makes me so great, that's resulted in my military bases all over the world killing innocent people. All my corporations that now do all the running of that make all the rules, right? All my technology, right? So it would appear the technology always been used against us. This is the thing that's so odd. We tramps around with our cell phones and our computers, and we're just so proud, especially if we can go buy the new $1,000 computer or $1,000 phone. And boy, aren't we so proud. And like I've been trying to say in this series, welcome to the beast system. Those of you that are waiting for the beast system, I mean, you're in it. You got the chip in your card. You carry around the programming and the brainwashing on your person 24 hours a day. We spend, most of us spend, I'd say the bulk of our time, I wouldn't say us, humanity in our culture now spends the bulk of its time engaged in social media of some kind and television, whatever. And so all of this is reinforcing this imperative of, you know, money is the tool, we are the God, having more is the goal, and all that other stuff really has finally been put behind us. It really was a joke. There's no God coming from the sky. Let's stop pretending. Spiritualism is inside you, and there's nothing wrong with money and having as much of it as you can. That's sort of the new thing. And as I say, it's not so much that I care anything about the justification for money. As I say, money is just it's a way to barter. You look at the history and you just simply, come on, don't blind yourself. It starts out as people who have something of intrinsic value to trade into a banking system designed to steal as much as possible, as fast as possible, being put toward a plan to elevate those people beyond everyone else and reach that utopia of their own creation. And so money is the tool in that, and it's also the tool of enslavement that they've used to enslave the masses. So I say it's not, it bears a little bit of reflection. What does evil and money have to do with each other? What's the danger there? Can't serve both God and mammon, money and love. How bad do we want God or love? How bad do you know, we think we're not evil? How bad do we really want to be like God, be like Christ, have the Christ consciousness, right? Relate a human life to what it means in money versus the idea of a human life in a spiritual sense as just an opportunity to serve God, and which is it sounds so religious, an opportunity to serve humanity as a vessel of whatever is that spiritual essence, right? And this is very close. I'll end it with this. It's very close to what Manly P. Hall says when you listen to him. That's why I want to make sure that people don't think I'm teaching the same BS. The difference is they think they're God. I'm looking beyond myself to a mind in a dimension outside of myself in which I am a thought. My consciousness is part of a thought of that mind. And so I'm still waiting for a supernatural reckoning of some kind. I'm still trying to reconcile the prophetic scriptures of all people, and especially the ones I'm most familiar with, the Judeo-Christian so-called prophecies, with this reckoning that's expected, and the history that's being played out with the people that think they're God, that have given us money as our God to worship. Whether we worship it, I don't mean we get on our knees. It's the value, it's the worth, it's the value system. We worship money because it's what's been given us. They don't give us the opportunity to worship production like our farmers did when I was a kid. And you thought about the small farm and the farmer, and the fact that if a farmer was a good farmer and produced a lot of stuff, well, they earned more than a bad farmer who was lazy and didn't produce a lot from their land. And that was quite fair. That earning, whatever that related to, we call it money. That was money well earned. That was good money. Spend it on any way you want. So, yeah, when you relate the way money is related to a human life today is where I was going with all this in my mind as it hits me shopping here, Home Depot, as I said, seeing the way these corporations, I mean, they get all the breaks, don't they? They get to go in and clear cut places with beautiful trees that could be feeding us. My, community I live in could be eating off all those trees they cut down to come and put an asphalt parking lot and cheapest construction in the world to build these pathetic strip malls so I can go to Home Depot and Safeway supermarket and Target and Kmart and Walmart and all these stores, instead of that natural community sort of capitalism, if you want to call it, but ingenuity in which people are trying to create, like I'm, building wooden surfboards right now. If I didn't have to compete against so many corporations building surfboards, it really would be a different road. And that's just in a very tiny little world like mine. When you look at the scale of human workers to corporate run industry and livelihood, what's really left? And where is the value? And so, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. I say don't convert your money to gold. That's silly. Convert it to food and drink, but not gold or silver. But even your gold and silver, what's it really worth? What's a human life worth? Why be better than someone else and not go to heaven? What's it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Thanks for being here, you guys. Look forward to talking to you soon.